She had refused his grandmother's money 11 times. Took the family less than 11 minutes to decide she'd stolen it. The lawyer's office in Gangnam was too quiet for what was about to happen. Adaeze Obi could hear her own pulse before anyone said a word. A small, stubborn drum beating against a silence that seemed to be waiting for permission to destroy her. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, back straight, chin level, the way her mother taught her to sit when the room did not want her there. Across the polished table sat the Kim family. Kim Ji-hoon in the center, his father Chairman Kim Dae-sung beside him, and Han So-yeon perched close enough to Ji-hoon that she looked less like a guest and more like a wife already installed. The family lawyer cleared his throat and read the final line of Kim Soon-ja's will again, as if repeating it might change the words. To Adaeze Obi, who cared for me when my own blood grew tired of visiting, 20% of my personal shares in Kim Textiles, and the house on Namsan. So-yeon's teacup did not so much set down as strike the table. "This is absurd," she said, voice trembling with something that wanted to look like grief but landed closer to fury. A caregiver, a stranger from Nigeria, here barely 2 years, walking away with 20% of a company her family built across 3 generations. Chairman Dae-sung did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Ms. Obi," he said. "My mother was 81 years old and on painkillers for the last 6 months of her life. I think you understand how this looks." "I understand exactly how it looks," Adaeze said quietly. "It looks like a woman who spent 2 years reading to a lonely old woman, cooking her favorite jollof rice from memory, and sitting with her through 3 hospital admissions is now being called a thief in front of her own family." Or, So-yeon cut in, "It looks like a gold digger who found an easy target and worked her the way people like you always do." The room went still enough to hear the air conditioning hum. Ji-hoon had not spoken since the reading began. He was staring at Adaeze the way a man stares at a photograph he is no longer sure he recognizes. "Ji-hoon," Adaeze said softly, "say something." He looked away first, and that, more than So-yeon's accusation, more than the chairman's cold arithmetic, was the moment Adaeze felt the floor actually give way beneath her. Welcome to Story Nest Tales. If this is your first time here, do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and stay with us, because what happened between Adaeze and Ji-hoon before this room is a story you will not want to miss a second of. 2 years earlier, Adaeze had arrived in Seoul with 1 suitcase, a nursing certificate the agencies kept calling unverifiable, and just enough savings to last 11 weeks if she was careful. She had come chasing a scholarship that fell through 3 days after she landed. The funding pulled by a foundation that emailed her a 2-line apology and nothing else. She was too proud to call home and admit it, and too broke to buy a return ticket even if she wanted to. She found the caregiving job through a Korean-Nigerian church group, pinned to a corkboard between a used bicycle ad and a flyer for language exchange. Live-in caregiver needed. Elderly woman. Difficult, the flyer warned almost apologetically. Adaeze called the number before she let herself think about it too long. The house on Namsan belonged to Kim Soon-ja, and Kim Soon-ja made it clear within the first 10 minutes that she intended to make Adaeze quit. "You people don't last," the old woman said from her armchair, not even looking up from her book. The last one lasted 4 days. The one before her, 6 hours. "I'm not going anywhere in 4 days," Adaeze said, setting her suitcase down by the door. "We'll see." Soon-ja tested her. She rang a bell at 3 in the morning for water she didn't drink. She criticized Adaeze's Korean, her cooking, the way she folded towels. Adaeze absorbed it all with the patience of someone who had already survived worse rooms than this one, and on the 7th night, when Soon-ja rang the bell again at 3 a.m., Adaeze arrived with water and something else. A small bowl of jollof rice she'd made from a recipe her grandmother used to whisper over a wood fire in Enugu. "I don't eat foreign food," Soon-ja said. "Then don't eat it," Adaeze answered, setting it down anyway. "I'll sit here while you decide." Soon-ja ate the whole bowl. She didn't say thank you, but the bell didn't ring at 3 a.m. again. Kim Ji-hoon met Adaeze for the first time on a Sunday afternoon 3 weeks later, when he came to check on his grandmother the way he did dutifully, guiltily once a month because running Kim Textiles' overseas division left him little room for anything else. He found the 2 women in the garden, Soonja teaching Adaeze how to fold paper cranes with hands that shook less when she was concentrating on something small. "Who are you?" he asked, more sharply than he intended. "Adaeze," his grandmother answered before Adaeze could. "The only one who's stayed longer than a week." "Sit down, you're blocking my son." Ji-hoon sat, mostly out of shock. He watched his grandmother laugh. Actually laugh. A sound he hadn't heard since his grandfather's funeral 3 years earlier. At something Adaeze whispered about a crane that looked more like a crushed paper airplane. He found himself staring longer than politeness allowed. "You're good with her," he said finally. "She's good, period," Adaeze said. "People just don't take the time to see it. That's a very generous read of a woman who told my mother she looked like a wet raccoon at her own wedding." Adaeze laughed, really laughed, and Ji-hoon felt something in his chest shift half an inch out of place. He came back the next Sunday, and the one after that. On his 4th visit, he arrived to find Adaeze teaching his grandmother how to say, "I'm hungry" in Igbo. The two of them laughing so hard at Soonja's pronunciation that neither noticed him standing in the doorway with a bag of persimmons he'd bought on a whim, the way a man buys fruit for someone he hasn't yet admitted he's thinking about. "You brought food," Soonja said, delighted, before he'd even sat down. "For once, useful. I heard persimmons were your favorite." "They were 40 years ago. Ask Adaeze what's my favorite now." Ji-hoon looked at Adaeze, who was trying very hard not to smile. "Jollof rice," she said. "She'll deny it to her grave." "I will deny it to my grave," Soonja agreed placidly. He sat down across from both of them and stayed 4 hours instead of the usual one, and when he finally left, he realized on the drive home that he hadn't checked his phone once. A thing that hadn't happened in longer than he could remember. By the 3rd month, his visits stopped being about his grandmother and started, quietly, becoming about the woman who made her laugh. Han So-yeon noticed before anyone said a word out loud. She had known Ji-hoon since university, had spent 4 years positioning herself as the daughter-in-law Chairman Dae-sung wanted. The merger their family's companies needed disguised as romance. She showed up at the Namsan house one afternoon uninvited, found Ji-hoon in the kitchen laughing at something Adaeze had said, and felt the ground she'd spent years building start to crack. "Cute," So-yeon said, setting her Chanel bag on the counter like a territorial marker. "The help has jokes." "Adaeze isn't the help," Ji-hoon said, an edge creeping into his voice. "She's the reason my grandmother is still eating solid food and not lying in a hospital bed feeling forgotten." "I'm simply saying," So-yeon smiled. "It's interesting how quickly some people make themselves indispensable in houses that aren't theirs." Adaeze said nothing. She had learned long ago that the loudest response to a poisoned smile was silence and competence, in that order. Soonja's health began its slow decline that winter. A fall in the bathroom, then a stroke that stole the strength from her left hand, then a second stroke that stole more than that. Through it all, Adaeze stayed. She slept in hospital chairs. She learned to read Soonja's slurred speech when the nurses couldn't. She held the old woman's hand through physical therapy sessions that left them both in tears. Ji-hoon watched all of it from the doorway more nights than Adaeze knew. "Why do you stay?" he asked her once. At 2 in the morning in a hospital hallway that smelled of antiseptic and vending machine coffee. "You could work anywhere. Better pay, easier patients." "Why her?" "Because nobody else stayed," Adaeze said simply. "And I know what it feels like when nobody stays." Ji-hoon didn't say anything. He just sat down next to her on the hard plastic bench, close enough that their shoulders touched, and neither of them moved away. It was Soonja, 3 weeks before the second stroke took most of her speech, who noticed what neither of them had said aloud. "You love her," she told Ji-hoon, gripping his hand with the strength she had left. "Don't be stupid like your father was." "He waited too long to tell my daughter-in-law he loved her, and by the time he said it, she'd already stopped listening." "Grandmother, I'm not asking your permission to say it."
"I am dying, Ji-hoon."
"Dying people don't have time for your embarrassment." He didn't answer her that day, but 3 nights later, standing in the hospital garden with Adaeze under a sky too bright with city light to show any stars, he finally did. "I don't know how to say this without it sounding like a corporate merger," he said, and Adaeze laughed despite herself. "But I think I've been in love with you since the paper crane afternoon." I just didn't have the courage to admit that a nurse from Nigeria had rearranged my entire life in 3 visits. That's the least romantic confession I've ever heard, Adaeze said. Is it working? A little. He kissed her there under the hospital garden lights, and for 3 months after that, the world felt uncomplicated in a way neither of them trusted enough to name out loud. Seunja passed away on a Tuesday morning in early spring, with Adaeze holding one hand and Ji-hoon holding the other. Her last clear words, 2 days before, had been for her grandson. "Marry the one who stayed," she'd whispered, "not the one who calculated." Nobody in the family knew, until the will was read, that Seunja had spent her final lucid weeks quietly rewriting it, cutting So-yeon's family's textile supplier contract clause entirely, and adding Adaeze's name to a share of the company that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with 2 years of a debt Seunja felt no one else had earned the right to be repaid. Which brings the story back to that too-quiet lawyer's office, to a teacup slammed against a table, to Ji-hoon looking away from the woman he loved at the exact moment she needed him not to. If you're feeling the weight of that room right now, you are exactly where this story needs you to be, because what happens next is the part nobody saw coming. Stay with us. The scandal did not stay inside that office. By Thursday, a tabloid photographer who moonlighted as a paralegal's cousin had sold the story to 3 outlets before dinner. By Friday morning, Adaeze's name was trending under a headline that made her stomach turn every time she saw it. Nigerian caregiver manipulates dying heiress out of millions. Comment sections filled with strangers who had never met her, deciding with total confidence exactly what kind of woman she was. Some were cruel about her nationality. Some were cruel about her class. All of them agreed on the same conclusion. She had come to Korea with nothing and found the fastest way to leave with everything. Adaeze stopped checking her phone by Saturday. It didn't stop her coworkers from checking theirs, or from the sideways looks in the hospital break room, or from a formal letter that arrived Monday placing her under review, while the hospital's ethics board looked into concerns raised by the Kim family's legal counsel. Chairman Dae-sung called a private meeting without Ji-hoon. "I'll make this simple," he told Adaeze across his office desk, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "Renounce the inheritance publicly. Issue a statement saying you were overwhelmed by my mother's generosity and felt it was inappropriate to accept. Do that, and this entire story disappears within a week. And if I don't, then it doesn't disappear. Follows you. Everywhere you go. For the rest of your career, someone will search your name and find the story first." Adaeze thought of Seunja's hand gripping hers in that hospital bed, of 2 years of 3 a.m. bells and jollof rice and paper cranes and a woman who had, in the end, trusted her more than her own blood did. "Your mother wasn't confused when she wrote that will," Adaeze said. "She was the clearest-headed person in this family. I won't insult her memory by pretending otherwise." Dae-sung's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "Then I'm afraid this will get much worse before it gets better." It got worse 2 days later, when Adaeze opened her apartment door to find So-yeon standing in the hallway, holding a coffee she clearly hadn't brought for Adaeze to drink. "I'll make you an offer," So-yeon said, stepping past Adaeze into the apartment without being invited. "Walk away quietly. Take a settlement. I can arrange it myself, no need to involve the family, no headlines, no ethics board. Just disappear back to wherever you came from with enough money to make it worth your while." "You mean the thing I keep refusing," Adaeze said. "Money for silence." "I mean survival," So-yeon snapped, the polish cracking for the first time Adaeze had seen it slip. "You don't understand what it takes to hold a place in that family. I have spent 4 years, making myself indispensable to people who would replace me in a heartbeat for someone with better bloodlines, and you waltzed in and undid it in 2. "I didn't waltz in for anything," Adaeze said quietly. "I sat with a dying woman because no one else would. If that threatens the wall you built around Ji-hoon, that isn't my failure. It's the walls." So-yeon's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what my family stands to lose if this merger falls through. My father's company is 3/4 underwater. This marriage was never about Ji-hoon. It was never even about love. It was the only rope left." For a moment, something almost like pity crossed Adaeze's face. "Then I'm sorry for you," she said. Truly. But I won't hand you my name to save your rope. You'll regret this, So-yeon said, setting the untouched coffee down hard enough to spill. I have spent my whole life learning how rooms like that one work. You've been here 2 years. You have no idea how quickly they'll close ranks against you the moment it's convenient. She was gone before Adaeze could answer. The door left open behind her. Cold hallway air rushing in like something that had already, quietly, won. Adaeze stood there a long moment before she finally closed it. Her hands trembling in a way they hadn't since the very first week she'd arrived in this country with nothing but a suitcase and a scholarship letter that turned out to be worthless. That night, Adaeze pulled her old suitcase down from the closet, the same one she'd arrived with 2 years earlier, and set it open on the bed without quite admitting to herself what she was doing. She thought about the 11 weeks of savings that had once measured out her entire life in Seoul, about how easy it would be to let this city spit her back out the way it had almost done before Soonja's bell first rang for water at 3 in the morning. She picked up the paper crane Soonja had taught her to fold, still sitting crushed and golden on her nightstand, and pressed it flat between her palms. Marry the one who stayed, Soonja had said. Not marry the one who calculated. Adaeze closed the suitcase without packing anything into it, and set it back in the closet where it belonged. Ji-hoon, meanwhile, had gone quiet in a way that frightened Adaeze more than the headlines did. He didn't call for 2 days. When he finally did, it was to ask her to avoid public events until the board settles down. A request so careful, so lawyered, that Adaeze felt something cold settle in her chest. You sound like you believe them, she said. I believe you, Ji-hoon said. But belief isn't what's on trial right now. Perception is. And perception is currently a fire I don't know how to put out without burning you along with it. So the plan is to let it burn. The plan is to be smart about this. Smart, Adaeze repeated, and hung up before her voice could break on the phone. For a week, Ji-hoon disappeared into board meetings and legal consultations, and Adaeze watched from the outside, wondering if the man who kissed her under hospital garden lights had been quietly replaced by the Kim Textiles executive underneath him all along. So-yeon, sensing the crack widening, made her move, appearing at Ji-hoon's office with lunch with sympathy, with the particular gentleness of someone circling something wounded. I never wanted it to be like this, she told him, and almost sounded like she meant it. But you have to see it now, don't you? The chaos she's brought. The company's stock dipped 2% this week alone. I would never have put you in this position. No, Ji-hoon said slowly, something shifting behind his eyes. You wouldn't have. You'd have found a quieter way to get what you wanted. So-yeon blinked. Excuse me? Nothing, he said, just thinking out loud. That night, unable to sleep, Ji-hoon did something he should have done from the very first headline. He pulled his grandmother's private files, not the will, but the personal recordings she'd kept on an old tablet Adaeze had taught her to use. Video diaries Soonja recorded in the last months when speech still came easier than writing. He found the entry dated 6 weeks before her death. His grandmother's face filled the screen, thinner than he remembered, but sharp-eyed as ever. If anyone ever questions why I'm doing this, she said to the camera, play them this. Adaeze doesn't know I'm recording it. She's refused money from me 11 times. 11. I counted. Once when I offered to pay off her family's debt in Nigeria, she cried and told me she wasn't here to be paid. She was here because she cared. That's not a gold digger, Ji-hoon. A gold digger takes the first time you offer. This girl argued with me for 20 minutes about why she shouldn't. The recording continued, Soonja's voice growing firmer. And if So-yeon is in the room when you watch this, ask her about the textile contract renewal she tried to push through in January using my signature. While I was recovering from my first stroke and couldn't read the fine print myself, ask her why my lawyer flagged it before I signed. I said nothing at the time because I wanted to see how far she'd go. Now you know. Ji-hoon sat in the dark for a long time after the recording ended. By morning, he had his legal team pull the January contract records. It took 11 hours to confirm what his grandmother had already known. So-yeon's family's supplier contract had been quietly restructured in the weeks after Soonja's first stroke. Terms altered in the company's disfavor and hers, pushed through with a signature obtained while the old woman's judgment was medically compromised. the exact accusation being leveled at Adaeze. Except this one was real, documented, and buried under a much better public relations team. Ji-hoon called an emergency board meeting. He invited the same journalists who'd broken the original story. He invited his father. He invited Adaeze, who arrived not knowing whether she was walking into a rescue or another execution. So-yeon arrived expecting a formality and found instead a screen already glowing at the front of the room. "Before this goes any further," Ji-hoon said, standing at the head of the table for the first time in his life without his father beside him, "I want everyone to see something my grandmother recorded before she died." The room watched Soonja's face fill the screen, watched her count on trembling fingers the 11 times Adaeze refused her money, watched her name So-yeon directly, watched her describe the January contract in detail sharp enough to leave no room for doubt. So-yeon's face had gone the color of old paper. She was ill. She didn't understand what she was signing. This recording proves nothing. It proves you knew she was ill enough to exploit and healthy enough to blame, Ji-hoon said. "We have the signed documents. We have the timeline. We have the lawyer who flagged the irregularity and was quietly told to let it go by your father's office. This is a private family matter," So-yeon said, turning toward the journalists with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Being twisted into something sensational for the January contract amendment carries your signature as witness," Ji-hoon said, cutting her off, sliding a printed page down the table until it stopped in front of her. "Not your father's. Yours. Would you like to explain to the room why you witnessed a signature from a woman recovering from a stroke? 3 days after her doctors noted in writing that her cognitive clarity was, quote, significantly impaired." So-yeon didn't touch the page. Chairman Dae-sung, who had said nothing throughout, finally spoke, his voice flat with something between fury and humiliation. "Is this true?" So-yeon didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence answered for her, loud enough to fill the entire room. "For 2 months," Ji-hoon said, turning finally to Adaeze, his voice breaking slightly on words he should have said much sooner. "I let perception outweigh the truth I already knew in my chest. I let you carry a headline alone that I should have burned down the day it printed. I'm sorry. Publicly, permanently sorry." "You should be," Adaeze said. But there were tears in her eyes now, not anger, relief, finally allowed to surface after weeks of holding it back. "So-yeon," Chairman Dae-sung said quietly, "you and your family's supplier contract are terminated, effective immediately, and I'd advise your lawyers to prepare for what comes next." So-yeon left the room without another word, her heels echoing down a hallway that no longer belonged to her in any sense that mattered. Before the room emptied, Chairman Dae-sung crossed to where Adaeze stood, something stiff and unpracticed in the set of his shoulders. A man unused to admitting fault out loud. "I asked you to disappear quietly," he said. "I threatened your career to protect a woman who had already stolen more from this family than you ever could have. I owe you an apology I don't know how to make properly, so I'll simply say it plainly. I was wrong about you, Ms. Obi. My mother saw what I refused to." "Thank you for saying it," Adaeze said. "Even late. Late is the only way men like me ever learn to say anything." He extended his hand, and after a moment, she took it. "The board will need a formal statement from the family within the week. I'd like your input on the wording, if you're willing to give it." It wasn't warmth, but it was respect, offered plainly, and Adaeze understood it was likely the closest thing to warmth Dae-sung had to offer anyone. By the following week, the same outlets that had printed Nigerian caregiver manipulates dying heiress ran a very different headline, one with actual documents attached, one that used the word exonerated in the first line. Adaeze Hospital lifted her review within 48 hours, the ethics board's letter of apology considerably shorter than the original accusation had been, the way these things always are. 6 months later, Adaeze stood in the garden of the Namsan house, the same garden where an old woman had once taught her to fold paper cranes with shaking hands. The house was hers now, legally, permanently, though it had felt like hers from the very first jollof rice bowl she'd set down at 3 in the morning. Ji-hoon found her there, the way he always had. On a Sunday afternoon he no longer needed an excuse to spend with her. "I brought something," he said, holding out a small box. Inside was a paper crane, folded from gold foil, slightly crushed on one wing. I tried to make it myself, he admitted. Grandmother would be disappointed. Adaeze laughed, the same laugh that had rearranged his life in the first place, and took the crushed little crane like it was worth more than everything the family had once accused her of stealing. She'd say you finally did something with your own hands instead of your money, Adaeze said. She'd say a lot of things, most of them insulting, most of them true. He knelt then, right there in the garden, the ring small and simple compared to what a family like his could have afforded, chosen deliberately because Adaeze had told Sunja once, in confidence, that she never wanted to be loved for what someone could buy her. Marry the one who stayed, he said, echoing his grandmother's last clear words. That's what she told me to do. I'm just finally listening. Not because of a boardroom, not because of a headline that got corrected, because I have known since a paper crane afternoon that you were never here for anything my family owns. You were here for a lonely old woman nobody else bothered to stay for. I want a lifetime of being someone you stay for too. Adaeze knelt down in the grass across from him instead of waiting to be pulled up into an answer, and said the only word that mattered. Yes. Somewhere above the Namsan garden, in a sky too bright with city light to hold any stars, it felt, for just a moment, like an old woman with shaking hands was smiling somewhere at a paper crane finally folded right. If Adaeze and Ji-hoon's story moved you tonight, don't scroll away without showing them some love. Hit like, subscribe if you're new to Story Nest Tales, and tell us in the comments. Would you have stayed silent like Adaeze did, or fought back the moment they called you a gold digger?